Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Alana. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for Sustainable Princeton. And thank you very much for joining us tonight for the Sustainable Minds session. We're going to be having a really essential discussion on the equitable electrification of our homes and commercial properties. And this webinar is part of our ongoing speaker series that explores community-centric climate issues and the actions we can take. So please stay tuned for more sessions to be announced.
What can I do for you? I'm Siri.
Okay, sorry about that. My Siri thought it would be fun to present. All right, Christine, you can go to the next slide. All right, thanks. So just a quick note about who Sustainable Princeton is. We are an independent, community-based nonprofit organization that works closely with our municipal government, public school district, the businesses and residents to help support our town in meeting its climate action plan goals, as well as maintaining our vibrant community both now and into the future. Next slide. So I do want to take a moment and thank our partners at the Central New Jersey chapter of the AIA, and a very special thank you to the president, Alina Chervinsky, and the secretary, David von Steppenbach, for helping us get this program accredited. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors at NRG Energy. Their support allows all of our Sustainable Minds sessions to be free and open to the public. Okay, so for all of our industry friends who are joining us tonight to get their continuing education credits, at the end of the webinar, there will be a poll that launches. And yes, you do have to stay till the end to get the credit. So when you get the poll, please answer yes or no. And we'll send that poll answer over to the AIA and they will give you your credit. If you have any questions about continuing education, please email secretary@aiacnj.org. Okay, so just a few housekeeping notes. We can go to the next slide. So if you have questions for the panelists, you can enter it in the Q&A window by clicking on that little Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. And you can do this at any point during the meeting. However, we're going to answer them in order and at the end of the session, which we reserved the last 30 minutes for. Next slide. Okay, so of course, you can also watch the recording of tonight's session and our prior Sustainable Minds sessions on our YouTube channel, and you can access that from the webinar archives link on our website. And now I'd like to invite our Executive Director, Christine Symington, to kick us off with a brief overview of why the electrification of buildings really matters to our community.
Thank you so much, Alana, and welcome to everyone. So we're very excited to have our panelists here tonight to talk about why electrification matters in our community. And I think this slide and this pie chart, really help to illustrate why we need to electrify our built environment in Princeton. This is an inventory of our emissions using a production-based methodology. And what you see in green and blue represents the emissions that come from our residential and commercial built environment. So these are the emissions that come from the heating, the cooling, and the devices that we plug into our outlets in our homes and our apartments and our businesses and our schools. And because it's such a big chunk of our emissions, we really have to focus on reducing the emissions in this sector. This is another creative way of visualizing just how big a portion of our emissions come from the built environment. So using some emojis, you can see just what percentage of the building emojis and the home emojis are of our overall emissions. And when we talk about building electrification, we also have to think about the electrification of transportation. All of our electricity comes from power plants that are using quite a lot, fossil fuels to generate that electricity. So we have to keep in mind that not only do we need to electrify our buildings and electrify our vehicles, we also need to be decarbonizing the grid, because we're going to be switching more and more to using the electricity from our grid. And I also always have to point out, whenever we're talking about electrifying transportation, we have to make it clear that the goal is to reduce dependence on single occupancy vehicles. It's not to replace every gas-powered vehicle or diesel-powered vehicle out there on the road with another vehicle that's electric. We want to reduce our dependency on getting around by vehicles altogether. So building electrification is in our climate action plan. We have an objective to explore options to accelerate affordable electrification of our building energy systems. It is also a key strategy in the state's energy master plan. The state's energy master plan calls to get to 100% clean energy by 2050. And that means 100% carbon neutral electricity generation and maximum electrification of the transportation and building sectors. And more recently, Governor Murphy has announced some more specifics and specific goals about how we as a state need to move towards electrification of our properties. So the executive order number 316 establishes a target to install zero carbon emission space heating and cooling systems in 400,000 homes and 20,000 commercial properties, and make 10% of low to moderate income properties electrification ready by 2030. So this is, if it's not quite clear already, it is a key strategy of how we as a community, how we as a state, and how we globally are going to meet the climate action reduction goals that we need to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And the E in electrification is not just for electrification, it's also for equitable. When we think about the expenses a household has, energy and electricity bills account for a big portion of people's income. And so if you are of a low and moderate income household, your energy burden is 3 times higher than others. If you have a white non-Hispanic household, your energy burden, the median energy burden of a Black household is 43% higher than that of a white or non-Hispanic household. The median energy burden of a Hispanic household is 20 times higher than that of a white non-Hispanic household. The median energy burden of a low-income multifamily household is 2.3 times higher than that of other multifamily households. The median energy burden of Native American households is 45% higher. And the median energy burden of older adults 65 and over is 36% higher than the median household energy burden. So, and we also think about renters. So the median energy burden of renters is 13% higher than that of owners. So as we move towards electrification of our built environment, we have to do it in a way that does not increase the energy burden of people that are identified here on this slide. And one of the other tools that we've looked at to kind of guide us here at Sustainable Princeton of how we might be helpful to our community is looking at the Building Electrification Institute's Building Electrification Housing Affordability guidebook. And they call for opportunities where you enact strong citywide regional tenant protections while preserving existing affordable housing by funding electrification, energy upgrades, and preventing housing cost and rent increases, and to enable the development of more all-electric, affordable, and missing middle housing. So that's a little bit of background about why we believe this is a really important topic and why Sustainable Princeton has made it one of our strategic priorities. And I'm going to hand it back over to Alana, who's going to introduce our 2 panelists for this evening and moderate our Q&A.
Thanks so much. So I have the pleasure of introducing our incredible panelists tonight. We are so lucky to have them. They are absolute rock stars in their field. I'm going to start with Daphne Rose Sanchez, the Executive Director of Kinetic Communities Consulting. Daphne is a New York native who has been passionately working as an energy equity advocate. Daphne founded Kinetic Communities in 2017, when she noticed there was a major representation gap in the energy sector. Kinetic Communities is a New York certified social enterprise benefit corporation, which advocates and implements strategic energy equity market transformations for diverse New York communities. Kinetic Communities has received recognition for their vital work ensuring frontline communities and people of color are a priority in a just and clean energy transformation. And also joining us tonight is Jamal Lewis. Jamal is the Director of Policy Partnerships and Equitable Electrification at Rewiring America. And I will add that is absolutely the leading electrification nonprofit organization in the country. Previously, he led the energy and climate initiatives at Green and Healthy Homes Initiative and worked with state and localities across the country to advance electrification, healthy housing, and energy efficiency programs and policies. He has multiple publications outlining pathways to promoting equity by retrofitting our existing housing stock to be healthy, energy efficient, all electric, and affordable. He's a young, gifted, and green 40 under 40 award recipient for his leadership in environmental justice. So with that, I'd like to ask Daphne and Jamal to go ahead and turn on their cameras. And if you have anything else that you'd like to say about your organization, please feel free to take this opportunity. And if not, I'm going to dive right into those questions.
Yeah, I want to quickly say that Daphne is also a 40 under 40.
Wow, that's okay.
You gotta put me on the spot there, Jamal.
That's all.
That's great.
Daphne's a rock star for sure.
Totally.
So
Well-
since you started, Jamal, why don't you go for it?
So yeah, we are. I work for Rewiring America. We are the leading electrification nonprofit across the country, and our goal is to ensure that efficient electric appliances, efficient electric machines are the most accessible and the most affordable on the market. So that is, electric vehicles, electric heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, those types of machines that we use on a daily basis. We call those the decisions to use those machines household decisions or kitchen table decisions. One of our founders did a study for the Department of Energy and found that about 87% of our country's total emissions come from the energy sector. That's not surprising. But of that 87%, almost half come from consumer kitchen table decisions. So again, that is the decision to invest in what we use to cook our food, heat our homes and water, and get us places, and increasingly where our power comes from. So by switching these machines, we can address a pretty significant amount of our country's pollution. So that is our goal for this decade.
Great. Daphne, do you want to add anything about Kinetic Communities?
Sure. So KC3 or Kinetic Communities Consulting, which is a mouthful. It's that I started the organization back in 2017, and it really stemmed from, I always joke around that I'm like a bunch of little balls of anger. So anger and frustration that the clean energy sector has been mobilizing programs in low-income communities for a very long time, but it was mobilizing it without community input or without community design. So when I started KC3 in 2017, is really thinking about that intersection of energy, housing, and equity, and how do we mobilize solutions from the community first. And so with the work that we do is really mobilizing and equipping communities to lead the charge on the clean energy transformation. And we do this by redistributing funding and programming to those existing infrastructures and ecosystems, organizations that are providing social services, that are providing financial literacy, housing justice work, and having them incorporate themselves into the fold that is the clean energy machine, and making sure that as we are doing this incorporation and as we are supporting that that transition, that we're ringing, you know, the right bells necessary to do course correction in the energy sector to make sure that the equitable transition, or that the transition is equitable, and that it is taking into consideration all of the different aspects that impact communities where they're at.
Yeah, that's incredible. So actually, this is a great point for us to kind of jump off from and sort of begin the conversation by defining what equitable electrification means and why it's important.
Sure. So I'm trying my best not to like go down a dark rabbit hole here. So for me, when we talk about equitable decarbonization, it's thinking about every single component of, you know, Jamal mentioned those kitchen table discussions, right? So when we talk about decarbonization, we talk about electrification, we're talking about removing the fossil fuel system from a particular industry sector. And for us in housing, we're talking about not only the removal of that fossil fuel system from the infrastructure, but we're talking about the ecosystem that surrounds that, right? So who are the local contractors that are mobilizing that? How can the funds that are being utilized for decarbonization go into communities that have been historically disinvested in due to structural racist practices? How do we ensure that the companies that are continuing to operate and maintain are those companies within a 2-mile, you know, a 2-block radius, right? That they can go in and continue to service it, not like a large corporation that has no ties, has no cultural competencies, has no understanding of where Jersey starts and New York ends, right? And so we want to make sure that for us, when we talk about equitable decarbonization, it's understanding the fabric of that existing ecosystem, and it's providing intentionally more resources to prioritize communities that have not had an opportunity to do the basics, right? Has not had an opportunity to do just general operation and maintenance. So we're having people that are not at the start line, but they're at like -100, all jump all the way in moonshot to decarbonize and to have a fossil-free ecosystem around the place that they live. And so when we talk about equitable decarbonization and electrification, that's kind of how we approach it. We think about it.
Yeah. And Jamal, do you agree with that, or do you have more to add?
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it's important to put all of this in the context of the fact that like electrification is happening. It's already happening. You know, we're starting to see more and more investments in electric infrastructure. There are more and more commercials now for electric vehicles. For the first time, I think, you know, for the first time ever, electric heat pumps outsold gas furnaces last year. So like this transition is happening. The proportion of all electric buildings is increasing across the country in all regions. And so this transition is happening. It's happening quickly, and without intentional intervention, it's just going to happen, and it's just going to benefit those who currently can afford to do that. For whatever, you know, afford, you know, often has a financial connotation to it, but I mean like afford in a broad sense where they can't, you know, a lot of people, a lot of households can't even afford to think about what this means, or, you know, what this transition means. And so again, it takes, you know, intentional action, intentional thought, to think about how to make this transition as inclusive as possible. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a perpetuation of the current system where those who are bearing the brunt of a lot of burdens, the burden of climate change, the burden of housing unaffordability, the burden of energy unaffordability, is, you know, falls on the same people. So that is why it's important that we're again, intentional about the types of policies and programs that we're developing and implementing.
And the intentionality, to build off of what Jamal says, it's not something that will come. I always say it's common sense. It's common sense. Why do people understand this? But it's not common sense, right? Because a lot of times programs and policies are designed in a very linear perspective, right? So we have to achieve this climate goal. This is kind of one silo of a conversation. Then there's a separate silo of conversation of we have to, increase production of new construction of affordable housing or new construction of mixed use properties in order to provide a solution to this housing crisis that we have, to the rising costs. We have to, and then on a separate segment is we have to deploy different types of workforce initiatives and strategies to mobilize the next generation, to provide them with career pathways, because there are studies that show that there is a gap now with the next generation trying to determine what is the right career pathway with them, because they've seen historically how different career pathways that have been recommended to them, right, have created a fiscal burden on the generations that are older than them, and they don't want to take that. And so when you hear about these things in a silo, you're trying to think about a solution within those silos. And so when you talk about equitable decarbonization and electrification, it's important to take a step back and say, okay, I am, look at every point of intersection of a person's life and seeing how equitable decarbonization impacts that point. Because when you do that, then you're starting to think more comprehensively of how do you use electrification as something to solve a couple of these problems. Well, as many as you can, right? And it's important to think of that ecosystem and infrastructure that you can move to the best of your ability to not cause harm or have unintended consequences.
Yeah. And, we are joined tonight by a lot of developers and architects and some, decision makers tonight in the room with us here. So, I wanted to get both of you to talk a little bit about your recommendations to start these types of projects from the industry side of things. And, maybe we can talk a little bit about the new construction process and the retrofitting process.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, you want to go?
Yeah. I think the first action, I think, it would be to make a commitment. Make a commitment to do things differently. Unless you're already going all electric, in which case continue to do what you're doing. You probably aren't here if you're doing that. Maybe you are.
Never know. You never know.
Right, you never know. To make a commitment to do things differently, to be a steward of the planet, a steward of your community. The second sort of action that I would recommend is to make a plan. When we talk about electrification or going all electric, for new construction, there isn't that much of a difference, right? The cost is at parity right now, so it doesn't cost you any more. In fact, it probably costs you a lot less to go all electric. So start planning when it comes to new construction for existing buildings and for retrofits. When we talk about going all electric or electrifying, it's not, we're not talking about it in terms of like do it all now. We recognize that a lot of existing buildings have systems that still have some useful life in them. So if your furnace, still has a couple of years of useful life, we're not suggesting that you switch it out and sort of sacrifice that, the remaining years. But knowing how long your furnace has, your boiler has, and starting to map that out, what it would look like to electrify, and because maybe you might need to upgrade your electrical panels, or you may need to, there may need to be additional work that you need to do prior to electrifying. Mapping that out and planning now can help make the process more seamless later down the line.
Yeah. And then I would add, if we're talking about electrification, if you are one of those folks that Jamal is saying, you've already gone all electric, that's good. The first step. Check, who are your contractors that you're hiring? Check, where are you buying your supplies from? Are you buying it from a local supply shop? Understanding what does your local hiring or outreach and engagement and information process look like? In certain areas, you do have, a particular zoning requirement of community engagement. Some areas you don't. What is the impact of that? Thinking about who are the potential tenants that you're going to have in those commercial spaces and how you're going to interact with those tenants. Same thing on the residential side, right? What is the relationship? Acknowledging that if you start that electrification process on a retrofit, what are the building envelope work that you're going to do? What is the education on opportunities for billing assistance that can be presented to the tenants if they are tenant paid tenant paid heat individuals? So thinking about every kind of component again of that electrification process can be helpful in doing a transition on the retrofit side. And as Jamal mentioned, on the new construction side, it should be pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough examples out there that show that this can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of like, for your specific situation, how are you going to make it work? And so making a plan and doing research early, which I know architects, developers, you all are very used to that anyway. So yeah, look at what has been done and how others have done it.
Yeah, actually, and that brings up a question I'm curious about. If you could talk a little bit about how can our industry friends here take advantage of the IRA incentives, and what can they do with that?
I'm gonna kick that over to Jamal.
Yeah, there's a lot in the IRA for in terms of incentives for this type of work. There, at the same time, there are a few that I'll flag for this audience today, and I'll talk about some of the other incentives that exist that you all might be aware of or might be able to publicize in your communities. For in terms of commercial buildings, there is a tax deduction, and you all may be aware of all of this too. So I'm just gonna say it anyway. But there's a tax deduction. It's the 179D tax deduction. It existed before the Inflation Reduction Act, but the Inflation Reduction Act gave it a boost. It gave it like a five-time boost. It is a deduction tied to energy use intensity. So the more efficient the building is in total, the more in terms of the deduction that you're eligible for. And so that is a useful incentive that can incentivize more efficient technologies such as heat pump water heaters, and the like. The other credit, so that's for commercial. For residential, there's another tax credit called the 45L tax credit. That is for new construction, and it's both for single family and multifamily. And the incentives for this 45L tax credit is tied to the meeting certain energy standards. So if you meet the Energy Star standard, you're eligible for the lesser of the two incentives. But if you build to the higher DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes Program standard, then you're eligible for a higher incentive. And that is both for single and multifamily. Now, I suspect that maybe there's at least one affordable housing developer who's listening, or affordable housing owner that's listening. There, for the first time ever, because this 45L tax credit also existed prior, they just got a boost through the Inflation Reduction Act. For the first time ever, this 45L tax credit, which provides up to $5,000 per unit in terms of a credit, can be paired with the low-income housing tax credit. Previously, the low-income housing tax credit was structured in a way that any additional incentive would reduce the total cost of developing the property, thus reducing the amount that you can get through the tax credit, through the low-income housing tax credit. Now, whatever you get with 45L doesn't reduce the total cost, and it's not counted as sort of reducing the cost, which means you can max out the amount that you can get with the low-income housing tax credit, and then on top of that can get a credit through the 45L. So for those who aren't familiar with this, the quick and easy is that both of these can result in more units being built at a higher standard, a higher energy standard, which is awesome. So those are two specifics. There are also some consumer tax credits that are not for that are for consumers. They're for the taxpayer's place of residence, and that is the 25C energy efficient tax credit for things like heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, weatherization, air sealing, even rewiring can also qualify. There's a $3,200 cap limit on the amount that you can get with that tax credit. And there are subcaps too. There's $2,000 limit for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, $1,200 for everything else. And then there's subcaps that I won't get into. There's so that's the 25C tax credit. There's a 25D tax credit, which is the residential energy production tax credit. That is for three types of technologies: solar, geothermal heat pumps, and battery storage. And that is a uncapped tax credit, which means it's a 30% tax credit no matter what the total cost is. So if the cost is 10,000, if it's 10 grand, you can get 30% off of that. If it's 30 grand, you can get 30% off of that. So it's 30% off the total cost. It is neither the 25C nor the 25D tax credits are refundable, which means you have to owe taxes in order to benefit. That is sort of the inequitable part of this, because oftentimes lower income households don't owe taxes, they get a refund. And so you cannot get a refund on the additional investment you made in either of these. You can only get a reduction in the taxes that you owe. I know I'm rambling. I'll just talk about two more. There's two consumer rebates as well. There's the electrification rebates that are point of sale rebates for consumers to invest in efficient electric appliances. And there's a $14,000 cap, $8,000 cap for $14,000 cap total. Within that, there's an $8,000 cap for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. And then the last one is the home efficiency rebates, which are not point of sale. They are rebates based on how much energy you save. So if you can either project through a model how much energy you're going to save, and that's tied to a certain incentive amount, or you can perform the work and then measure how much energy you saved and then get a rebate on the back end. So there's a lot out there, a lot for consumers, less for developers, but there's still incentives out there for developers.
And in case you didn't have a pen and paper while Jamal was beautifully taking everything out of his brain, I dropped some links for you all on the chat from Rewiring America and Novaco that talks about the low-income housing tax credits expansion, as well as the Department of Energy's link. So feel free to look at all those websites, because if you're like me, 7 o'clock on I was going to say Monday, but it's Thursday, 7 o'clock on a Thursday, I definitely didn't capture everything that's in Jamal's mind, but it's very good information and very important.
Yeah, I'm so impressed that you had all that memorized. Seriously. Thank you for doing the heavy lifting of wading through, because I know the IRA it's overwhelming for a lot of folks to go through it. So that's really helpful that those are in the chat. And thank you, Daphne, for dropping those in. This kind of brings up this question that, we've been talking about here at the office. We know there's a housing crisis. It's a national housing crisis, but it's very it's tangible in Princeton, especially an affordable housing crisis. And it's all happening at the intersection of the climate crisis. And I want to ask you too, how can we avoid having low carbon housing becoming a barrier to creating, the housing that we need? We're lucky that we have a lot of affordable housing advocates in the community. We also have some opposition, and sometimes we see that the environmental or conservation stances get weaponized to prevent it from being built. So could you both talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will say, and I'm just trying to pull up this document so I can share it with you all. A lot of the conversation around housing and financing affordable housing, there's often this kind of pull and push of, well, the more net zero housing we build, the less affordable housing is going to be constructed, which is not necessarily true. I think there's a lot of opportunities to educate, in particular, underwriters at housing finance agencies and underwriters in banks that are using the community that are distributing CRA credits or Community Reinvestment Act credits into particular project deals for new construction and retrofits, that can say, look into, okay, how much is the project actually saving? What is the greenhouse gas reduction opportunity? Because these two things combined can help reduce the actual loan costs, because you're projecting out the net savings across the O&M that traditionally would not be there, right? And it's also projecting out those the mitigation strategies or the resiliency strategies that electrification presents. And so this is where I was saying at the beginning, if you look at it kind of just within the normal lens, you're going to continue to face those issues. But if you look at it a little bit more creatively, and looking at the value of electrification and value of efficiency within the underwriting structure, you can actually expand the dollar that you have on a loan deal, and you can do the same amount of housing with the same amount of funds that are being distributed. And again, there's also all of the investments that Jamal mentioned. There's also utility investment, there's state investment. So if you incorporate all those investments into the capital stack, it can be a lot more, it'll be a lot more less tight of a deal in order to pursue. And I'll drop a link in the chat shortly, but basically the Community Preservation Corporation in New York City had put together a couple of white papers talking about this, about the value of taking efficiency and taking decarbonization, or the cost of carbon, as a recommended measure. So the other component of this is, when you underwrite a deal in affordable housing, you underwrite to solve for certain health contaminants, right? You underwrite to solve for mold and asbestos. If you're retrofitting a project, it's something you have to remediate. But we don't have that infrastructure today for carbon. And so having that opportunity is, again, a secondary layer that can be explored in order to maximize doing affordable housing in a way that allows them to electrify.
Yeah, and I'll add that increasingly businesses are, with their like their sustainability commitments, and in the context of the the SEC proposed rule that would require businesses to report and companies to report their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So emissions that they directly emit, or the emissions that they that they can contribute to. That includes banks. That includes other entities that you're getting financing from. And so, with those entities starting to either be required or make their own commitments to like track and record, carbon pollution, that is going to like trickle down and impact you as well. Eventually, I think it's going to be really, and costs are already, starting to rise, but I think costs are going to start to rise even further as less people are starting to go in the direction of, using fossil fuels and instead going the electric, renewable energy route. So as you're considering the cost of what it means to go electric, also consider the rising cost of what it means to stay on the fossil system.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, when I heard you, Jamal, say that, I'll never forget what you said at that conference, because I've been using it ever since. Jamal said this really good thing at a conference a couple of, I would say years ago, literally, I think last month. We were explaining, this cost. Jamal was explaining the cost of decarbonization, right, today versus in the future. And he said this great analogy that I still use today, Jamal, by the way. I took that from you, so I just want to let you know. But he told me, and he told the audience, not me or our working group, and he said, you have to think about decarbonization in the way that you think about going out to eat with your friends. If you go out with a large group of friends and they all just play diner dash and they disappear on you, you're gonna be mad that you have that bill, right? You're gonna be mad that you're paying for this bill. It was so funny to me, because I was very, very pissed. I was like, if somebody leaves that damn bill on me, I'm gonna be tight. But it's the same concept, right? And so when you're talking about decarbonization and talking about moving away from gas to electricity, you don't want to be that last person with the bill, because you're going to pay not only for the gas consumption that you're having at your property, but also for the entire infrastructure from your line to the main pipelines that the utility still has to operate, because you're the only one left. And so you're going to foot that bill because they need somebody to pay for it. And so it's just, thinking about how quickly the transition is happening and how much you're not going to want to participate in paying for that bill is important. And Jamal, it was so good. I really appreciate using that analogy, because that's the same one I use every single time after we have that meeting.
Yeah, I might be using that one too. Thank you for
So
that.
good.
Awesome.
I was so angry. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Hit me with the bill? Absolutely not. We wouldn't be friends anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit about, advocating for this type of work to be done. I know, we want to see more of it here in Princeton. Is this something that the public should be advocating for? And also, what can the industry professionals do to advocate for this? And I'm talking about the developers, the architects, and, like the HVAC and the electrical subcontractors that are involved on these kinds of projects.
Yeah, so I will say one thing that we've seen as we look at a lot of deals that are being refinanced through housing finance agencies, and they're just like slight modifications of scopes, right? And slight modification of mechanical specifications that you all as an architect or your MEP might be putting in, and making sure that, hey, maybe it's not this furnace, maybe it's an opportunity for your VRF system or a mini split system, or maybe it's a hot water heat pump system. So really exploring, what does that scope change look like? What are some other things in the scope that can be supported? And then looking at, what is the funding that can help support that change, because it exists, right? It's not like you're adding on this $15,000 thing and there's nothing to help cover some of that cost. I think that's kind of at the first level in your schematics and your MEP design, really taking a critical look and saying, what is a like-for-like replacement that is not really valuable for the property today, that we can probably update or incorporate something even stronger. So I think that's my biggest recommendation. It's the one that we give to our architects and our engineers all the time.
Yeah, and I think what I would add, I imagine that one thing that would make this whole transition easier is like market certainty. And so so the transition will be easier, costs will come down if we knew that New Jersey was going in a certain direction, or the country was going in a certain direction. And there would be more clarity around jobs. I think the one thing that, and now I'll sort of get back to the point, but the one thing that I sort of quip about in terms of like workforce development programs is the fact that that's only half the job. Like, developing someone to be able to do a job, providing like on-the-job training isn't enough. They need to be able to know that they're going to get a job afterwards, and they're going to be able to like have work. And the best way to do that is to ensure that there's sufficient demand. If there's demand, then that can help drive up supply, because more people will realize that there's a need to be met. The more that there can be clarity in our country, the more that there can be clarity in the state of New Jersey, that the state is moving towards an all-electric future, I think the better off and like the more effective and efficient and affordable this transition will be. And there are a few like ways that I think we can advocate is as developers, as builders, etc. And that is with there's a few opportunities in New Jersey, actually. There's a future of gas proceeding that will be kicking off, I think, fairly soon. And what that is intended to do is map out what a phased and like controlled transition away from gas could look like. And yeah, and so like what does that mean in the context of New Jersey? And so engaging with that process, making your voice known, and articulating some of the challenges of going electric. It isn't easy. It is something that's happening. It is something that there's a lot of benefits to going electric, but in some cases it might be difficult. Like with the permitting process might be or transmission, you might need to upgrade the transmission lines or upgrade the electrical panels. Like there's all types of barriers that might exist for you. The presence of that barrier does not mean that we just have to sit back and accept it. We can advocate for a better environment, both like a better policy environment, a better programmatic environment that can help alleviate some of these barriers. And so using your voice to not only express like support for the transition, but also express some of the issues that you're dealing with to help us make recommendations that ultimately can help you on the back end. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. That's really important. I guess, before we go and open up the Q&A to the participants, I was curious if there are any case studies that, folks can look to see examples, that it has been done. It can be done well. This is the model we should be maybe aspiring to. It'd be great if you have some in New Jersey, but I don't want to limit if there's something really amazing that you're like, this is the one.
Yeah, so I'm all about not raising any costs for anyone. So I just dropped a link in the chat. This is not, unfortunately, New Jersey. As much as I love you, New Jersey, this is a New York example. So in New York, we have something called low-income co-ops that are called Housing Development Finance Corporations, or HDFCs for short. And these cooperatives came historically from There was a lot of disinvestment in New York in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of buildings were burning, a lot of buildings were abandoned. And so the individuals that lived in these properties kind of united together and created a cooperative. And the city said, sure, we don't really care about these buildings. Here, you can buy it for $1 a unit, and the property is yours. So you fast forward to now, a lot of these properties are still operating, although they have very limited reserves, very limited capital. They're still very much one of the kind of little bit of left that's like affordable ownership structure allows you to own your home in New York City. And so when we talk about decarbonization, in this particular project, this is a building that wanted to collectively, they all wanted to decarbonize. They all wanted a heat pump. They were very, very excited about it. New York City, we have a high cost of electricity. And so what they did was that the first step that they did is that they wanted to do some weatherization of the internal units for every single shareholder. And then after they weatherized their units, then they went and they put in a couple of heat pumps. So our partners, which is a woman-owned business called IntelliGreen Partners, really spearheaded this initiative. And it was a learning process. And this was something that started before the IRA was around. They were really interested in 2018 in electrifying. And so a lot of low-income communities are actually really motivated to do this work. They're really motivated to have a healthy home. They're really motivated to do what they feel like is right. But they just need, a little bit of a push, a little bit of support. So IGP, Valerie and Alan, what they did was that they sourced people, they sourced engineers, they sourced a steam expert to see how this system interacted, the heat pumps would interact with their steam system. They sourced the heat pump distributor, they sourced the local supplier. And so from 2018 all the way to so around 2020, 2021, they actually electrified their entire building. And so this is a project that, they're really happy about. We're really happy for them. And they showed that there is a pathway to do this if you kind of put your mind and think about all the different components. And so they have, I will say they are very much like typical New Yorkers, very quirky, very big personas. But I'd encourage you to look at the case study. They'll have some of the engineers that were talking a little bit about how this project came to life.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Jamal, any case studies from you, or shall I open the Q&A floodgates?
I'd say you can go. There are case studies, but I think you can open the floodgates.
Okay. All right. Well, then I would like to invite everyone to ask some questions. This is the opportunity to get, your specific problems and trials and tribulations answered by the experts. So please use this time. We have the next 30 minutes to do that. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom to ask your questions. And I do see that we have one already. So I'm actually going to just start with the one that came in. This is from Joshua Zinder. He's a local architect in town. He asks, are there financial incentives to help with community-oriented projects like a laundromat? There is definitely a need for that here. So I would be curious to hear, what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so from what I know like New Jersey has a program called the Comfort Partners program, which is more on the residential side. Utilities across the country, including New Jersey, have particular programs that are really designed to provide funding and incentives in order to mobilize projects. I'm not sure if you're doing like a new laundromat or a retrofit laundromat, but I would strongly encourage you to look at I'm going to drop the link in the chat, the New Jersey Clean Energy Program, the commercial industrial, because they'll have some incentive information for all of it, for rehabs, for battery storage, EV, etc. Also, Jamal's
Joshua,
the expert. Jamal, you put that to everyone. Jamal is the expert. I can never ever spew every single detail of the IRA ever.
yeah, I've been working on it for like 8 months. Joshua, your question was about, you said new. It's a new laundromat is that what you meant? Just gonna
Yeah.
wait.
You said
Yeah,
new.
I think there's definitely a need for a new laundromat in town. So I think I feel safe saying I think that's what he meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any IRA incentives for that, unfortunately. And at the same time, one thing that I didn't flag is that another opportunity in that, for you all to advocate in New Jersey is the triennial energy efficiency program review. And that happens every 3 years. And the idea is to have a public process that helps to decide what types of programs and incentives and resources can be offered through the next cycle, the next 3-year cycle. And this is funded through utility ratepayers. So you can help decide how you want those ratepayer dollars to be spent. And if you want it to be spent on commercial, there typically are commercial incentives, but if you want laundromats to be included, it might be time for you to make that known in that process.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, so I've got some more questions for you. Pamela de los Santos asks, can either of you speak about hot water heat pumps for multifamily? Any issues or problems that need to be overcome?
Yes. So this is a particular project that we have been working on for the past, 2023? 3 years now. So one thing that's very, very important with multi-family hot water heat pumps in existing buildings is you have to make sure that you have sufficient amount of size of space in order for the heat pump to have enough air to intake. So you should really be working with an engineering firm, a mechanical engineering firm that understands building systems and building science in order to give you an appropriate sizing for that heat pump. And that's again in thinking about who are your partners and how are you coordinating, collaborating. So I think a really good engineering firm that understands the mechanical systems is one thing. The other thing is making sure that you have a good local supplier that can give you a variety of hot water heat pump sizing and options that you can choose that's most suitable for your retrofit project. And I'm talking exclusively retrofit. And the reason why I'm talking about sizing is because if you don't size it correctly, then you can have some issues. So sizing is very, very important. As with anything, right? It's not really mutually exclusive to a hot water heat pump. If you oversize the Scotch Marine boiler, which is a big large cylinder boiler, you're gonna have way too much heat in the property. And so the same thing applies for hot water heat pump. Same concept.
All right, great. So the next question that just came in, I think I'm going to ask Christine actually. Stan is asking if Princeton is considering a ban on new gas stations.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Maybe someday, right?
I'm
All
not
right.
aware of any plans to add any.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, so Kirsten Thoft, also one of our local architects in Princeton, asks, can a developer claim the solar tax credit for projects that are built and then sold? Or does the property and solar install need to continue to be owned by the developer?
Oh, well, what I would
Go for
say
it.
is sorry, quick question, Kirsten. The solar tax credit that you're talking about, that's the commercial tax credit, the investment tax credit that you were talking about?
Residential.
Okay.
Residential.
So quick point of clarity here. So the residential tax credit, and I can find the Treasury put out a Q&A around this too. it is for the place of residence for the owner. So the owner is the one that not the owner, so the taxpayer's place of residence. So it would be the person who's living there would be eligible to get the tax credit for installing the solar. Obviously, it could be a solar developer that is doing the installing, and so the taxpayer's residence the taxpayer would pay the full cost, but then get the 30% back. So that wouldn't. So that's for the 25D residential tax credit. What I will also say is that there's an investment tax credit for like larger projects. So that I think that aligns better with what you're asking about, Kirsten. It's for larger solar projects. It's the Section 48 tax credit. It's for larger projects, and we don't have all of the rules yet for that for the update to that credit. So I don't know how they're going to handle the transfer of ownership there. We have to like wait and see.
And then I just want to say, Kristen, for the purposes of solar, right, residential is considered the 1 to 4, and then community scale solar, where you have folks that are subscribing, would be considered commercial.
So she's responded. Got it. I keep wanting to put a PV. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I would say that the tax credits that Jamal just mentioned are the federal tax credits. So the thing to note with a lot of these is, as I mentioned earlier, there's stacked. So you have an opportunity to do tax credits. And one thing that I'm not familiar with New Jersey's programs and policies, but Desire, which is a website that has like a lot of the information. That's literally what I'm looking up now as I'm talking to y'all. But Desire will have the information on like the Jersey solar tax credits. So there's different layers of credits and incentives and funding that you can access. So there's the federal level stuff that Jamal just talked about. Then there's state level stuff. And then there can be particular municipalities or utility programs that you can all layer in order to make a solar project feasible for residential, right? 1 to 4 apartment units, or, if you're doing a multifamily or commercial, which will be classified for the purposes of solar space as commercial. So I just dropped that link on the chat. Yeah, no problem. It's a great website. It's the perfect cheat sheet for other states. And as a New Yorker, I always use it when people are asking about everything outside of the 5 boroughs.
Yeah, and Kirsten, the 48 investment tax credit is something that you can utilize. That is both for like larger scale solar projects that include like multiple buildings, as well as community solar. And there is an adder for that can be there are adders to that credit that can be added to the amount to the total credit that you can get. There is a portion of the adder. Treasury just came out with guidance or initial guidance in February. So that's not just, but a couple months ago, that determined that there is a set of capacity that is specifically set aside for affordable housing projects. So there's a base credit and then an adder on top of that. There's a limited number of capacity for that adder, and there's a set aside for affordable housing. So if you want, and there are other set asides too. So there's a set aside for projects located in a low-income community. There's a set aside for economic benefit projects, and that is specifically projects where like at least 50% of the benefits go to the tenants. So there's specific set aside for that type of project. And then there's the fourth one. So there's affordable housing located in low-income community, the economic benefit project, and the fourth one is located in tribal communities. So there's adders for all four of those types of projects. There's like a specific set aside for each of them, and that you can get a credit, assuming that you use like prevailing wage, up to 70% off of the development. So it's a pretty substantial credit. So I would look into that, Kirsten.
That's really helpful. Thank you. She says, great, thanks. I'll check it out. So another question came in from Joshua Zinder, who said, I lease an electric vehicle. Is there a way I can get the tax rebate? The lender's not going to be able to use it.
So the way the rebates work is for ownership, not lease. So I will say no, but I will let Jamal speak otherwise on the federal stuff. I also, in addition, I just dropped the DEP New Jersey website on electric vehicle infrastructure incentives. And so they give a high level overview of kind of what are some state exemptions, incentives for purchasing, and then other kind of incentives that you can utilize. And then as Jamal said, there's some IRA tax credits you should look into. And I know this because it's great. The Easy Pass gives you a credit. Definitely check that out. There's like a clean car Easy Pass, which is great for tolls.
Z Pass, like the toll.
Yeah, do you not have that in DC?
No, we do. I was just making fun of you because you keep going across all those bridges in New York. There are federal tax credits for electric vehicles too. There's a tax credit for the purchase of a new electric vehicle, and then there's also a brand new used vehicle tax credit as well. There's both a price limit for the new for how it has to, like for new, it has to cost like $75,000 or less for the cost of the EV. For used, it's $55,000 or less. But I think both of those are also for ownership too. But because we're talking to architects and developers, there is also a EV charging credit also that was created through the Inflation Reduction Act. That is specifically for there's a geographic component to that, specifically for like low-income communities, for something they call energy communities. But those guidelines and guidance came out, I think, in late March, and it's on that same Treasury website that Daphne shared earlier. Yeah.
I have a question about gas stoves versus induction stoves. So I was talking with a multifamily developer and asking where they were in terms of having new developments have all induction stoves. And this was maybe about a year ago. And the response I got was, that consumers, the renters, want gas stoves. Like, have you seen that change, or do you see that changing where the demand is shifted, where it isn't sort of the selling point, that, your apartment's going to have a gas stove, that it's going to be a selling point that it has an induction stove?
Yeah, there's a lot of like elements to this question. So let me yes, things are changing. I think there are a few reasons why. I'm putting this in context of the fact that electrification is happening already, and that includes, the way we heat and cool our homes, etc., vehicles. I think also includes stoves. And part of the reason why electrification is happening is because people are recognizing that they're better machines in terms of like efficiency, like they're way more efficient. Heat pumps are, can be at least twice as efficient as gas furnaces. And the same goes with induction versus a gas stove. So that's one reason, but the other reason is all of the new research that's out showing the impacts of burning gas in buildings, and the fact that there are carcinogens present in gas, and like gas stoves even leak. Gas stoves can leak even when they're off. So there's a lot of like increased transparency around what it means to own a gas stove and what that means in terms of your health, well-being, and all of that. The other sort of piece of this, I'm curious about this developer, and like who they were polling, because I think of all of the reasons why someone might rent, I would suppose that that a renter is not going to not choose a building because it doesn't have a gas stove. I think they're going to choose it for a lot of other reasons, like location. Like if they have the ability to choose, they're going to choose it because it's a good location, it might have a good floor plan, it might have sunlight. I don't think they're like, I guess is my experience that they're not going to like choose to not rent there because there's an induction stove instead of a gas stove. And yeah, and I guess to Stan's point, induction stoves requiring special pots. I don't, yes, because it's magnetic, but I think there are a lot of pots and pans out there on the market that both work for traditional stoves and are magnetic and can work for induction. And then one last point is that as we're talking about going all electric, I think one thing that I hear a lot is that we're, to make sure that we're incorporating and are mindful of like the resilience aspect. Like as we're going all electric, we want to make sure that, we're not overloading the grid, leading to blackouts and like leaving people without power. And that's why things like battery storage is really important. And we're starting to see more of that hit the market. That's why it's important to have solar, to have more distributed energy, things like microgrids. But the really interesting intersection here with stoves is that there are manufacturers who are manufacturing stoves that can also act as a battery. So there's that, if you have an EV and there's vehicle to grid or vehicle to building capability, and you have a gas stove that has a battery and you have solar, like you're pretty well insulated from, any potential shocks. And you might even be able to make money, by selling some of the energy back to the grid. And that's something that you can't do if you have, a gas stove.
Josh has an additional question there. He's gotten feedback that heat pumps have a hard time covering extreme hot and cold days. And how do you cover the gaps? Do you need backup?
Yeah, so I would say, in the project that I mentioned earlier, the HDFC, it's critical to do, or I recommend to do building envelope work, right? To ensure that the units are properly weatherized before you put in the heat pump. If you have the opportunity to do the heat pump and do the weatherization at the same time, then that's great. Want to make Oh, sorry, I was just reading your next thing. It's great that you're putting inductions, and you're absolutely right. There's a value for the insurance companies. So that's what we've always recommended on our projects that are electrifying, is to again look at it. There's what is it that it's called? It's the interactivity of energy utilization, right? So just because you do one thing doesn't mean it like standalone is amazing. It is all interconnected, right? So if you're putting in the heat pump, understanding proper sizes, having somebody that does the proper calculation to make sure that you actually have the right size of heat pump is very, very important. Using cold climate heat pumps is also very important. Sorry. Oh, sorry, my body's like, it's 8 o'clock. Using cold climate air source heat pumps is also very important. And then just making sure that, as you're doing it, you're thinking about the ventilation, you're thinking about the building envelope work. And I'll drop the cold climate air source heat pump list in the chat as well.
Yeah, Joshua, great that you're now putting induction. The other thing I would add in terms of the heat pumps, the South region of the country almost exclusively uses heat pumps, and there are very extreme heat, extremely hot days that occur there. So I think that is at least anecdotal evidence that heat pumps can cover and provide the support needed for extremely hot days.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Jamal, because the reality is that this is not new technology. Like, it's new to us, but it's
Yeah.
not new in the global economy. When I'm Puerto Rican and Costa Rican, so when I talk to family members in those countries, in Puerto Rico and Costa Rica, and I show them the heat pump, they're like, "Oh, we've had this for like 20 years. What are you talking about, new?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's new, it's innovative." And they just laugh at me because they're like, "We've been have this and and it works great." And so it's a technology that's proven in other countries, in Germany and China, in Latin American countries. Like, we've had it for a while. It's just new to the American market. And so the technology is becoming more and more advanced. There's a project here in New York. It's called Clean Heat for All, where the New York City Public Housing Authority is partnering with a technology called Gradient. And thinking about, public housing has, these are concrete wall, concrete buildings, so penetrating it is a lot trickier. Well, Gradient is a technology where you just put it in the window like an air conditioning unit. It's the same exact thing. And so it's a great solution, thinking about, again, in your architectural design phase, if you have limitations of structural integrity that you're worried about, there are technology solutions that are coming out today to help mitigate that risk and still get you to that same goal. So I can also drop that link in the chat. And this is something that happened last year.
Yeah. So I was going to address the very cold days too. So like Maine, Maine is basically installing heat pumps at the fastest rate in the world, almost. And so there are very cold days in Maine, and they're doing it. And there's been a lot of articles over, and the cold snap from this past year. There were a lot of stories around the fact that heat pumps not working in extremely cold days is a myth. They do work. And the work that's happening in Maine, work that's happening, Minnesota, even places in like in northern Europe are all, also are installing heat pumps, and there's extremely cold days there too. So they work in extremely hot days and also in extremely cold days.
Great. Well, I think I am going to wrap up our session by asking you both to kind of give me what I like to say, make the argument irresistible for our architects and our developers that that this is possible. What are the quick hits? Honestly, it one of the things that stood out to me, I mean, Jamal, you kind of blew my mind that the cost to build electrified buildings, it's at parity now. So, what else? Give me the quick hits that we can take away so that everyone goes out and feels like, yes, I am doing this now.
I won't be as good as Jamal, but one thing that we talk to our architects and engineers all the time is you don't want to get left behind. Like, there's a real value in this business case. You all, doing your projects, doing your design work, if you're able to grasp it down and you're able to find out the methodology that works best for the building typologies that you're working on, then you're leading that charge, right? And so it's in a blink of an eye, electrification is just going to become standard building codes. And so once it's standard building codes, everybody's doing it, right? And so you have a unique opportunity now to work on it and to troubleshoot it and become those architects and designers, I would say of the future, but of literally next week, because policies and initiatives are coming faster than you can see. And so the faster you're able to adapt your business model and adapt your design guidelines and adapt kind of the partnerships, the contracting partnerships and the MEP partnerships that you're having, the better it can be and the more advantageous it is for your businesses.
Yeah. In addition to that, it's more efficient. There's not, going all electric, you're not polluting, you're not contributing to poor health outcomes, you're not contributing to the climate crisis that we find ourselves in. As Daphne mentioned, we're going in this direction anyway. So the earlier you adopt, the better off your business will be. And then I think the last point that I'll make is we're talking to a bunch of folks who live in Princeton, right? I happen to be a Penn grad, and I think Penn's going all electric. So you don't want to be, falling behind Penn.
No, we certainly do not. Yeah, thank you both very much. I mean, this was awesome. I really appreciate you both joining us tonight. And I certainly feel very empowered. I can't imagine that anyone is going to walk away feeling anything less than jazzed about doing this work. So thank you again. This is incredible. I really appreciate you dropping all those links in the chat. And to all of our participants, we will be able to follow up with the recording and we'll share the links as well. So you'll have them. And now you'll see the poll is up. So if you are here for your AIA credit, please answer the poll and I will be sharing all those names with the secretary at the AIA and you should get your credit.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you both. Have a good night.
Yeah.